Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marc-André Pigeon, Marc-André Pigeon, and I am the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives. Before we begin today, I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory, and this is the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, the Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota for millennia. It's also the homeland of the Métis Nations. I always like to reflect on our gratitude for being able to work on this land and share in its bounty, reflect on its beauty, and to reaffirm our commitment to the shared and necessary and important work of reconciliation, both in the university context and in the cooperative sector. Now, today's talk kind of wraps up our season for co-op conversations. We typically start in September and in May, take 3 months off. And so that's the milestone today. For those of you who may have been able to attend some of our co-op conversations earlier in the year, you may have noted that we're trying to draw a little more on our fellows in this process. We have a roster of research fellows, the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operative, and as part of our 40th anniversary, we want to kind of give our fellows some profile. And so that's partly what led us to invite Dr. Murray Fulton to share some reflections. Also, just Murray always has really interesting things to say, so I think you're going to have a really nice conversation ahead. So a little bit on Murray. Murray has been around the center pretty much since the beginning, since 1985. He missed the start date by about a year, and he has been a core member of the center ever since, and still today. I still turn to Murray often for advice and conversation about weedy issues and just day-to-day issues. He served as the center's director 2 times over the center's going on 41 years. First from 95 to 2000, and then from 2014 to 2019. So as Stan noted to me the other day, it's about 25% of the center's history has been kind of under Murray's leadership. Throughout his career, Murray has believed in the potential of the cooperative model, and I think has devoted much of his working life to studying its form, teaching about cooperatives, researching their successes and failures. We're going to talk a bit about that today, guiding many graduate students through cooperative research projects, and being an advisor and a kind of a sage to the cooperative sector. Murray's often sought out for his advice on how to navigate some of the challenges the cooperative sector faces from now and again. In a scholarly space, Murray is an exceptional scholar. He's published more than 60 scholarly articles, not all on cooperatives, but many on cooperative theory and research. And I'd say in the cooperative space, his focus areas have been on governance, economic analysis. There was a flurry of activity around new generation cooperatives, and of course, agricultural cooperatives, I think, where Murray kind of really hangs his hat. In fact, has been bringing me into some conversations around that theme in New Zealand of late. So, we'd like to think, and I think it's true, that it's a special kind of person who can work in this space and help the cooperative sector do what it does. They have to be really smart. They have to read the room. They have to have a lot of energy. They also have to know when to kind of step back and let others lead. They have to ask tough questions, and they have to think. And they also have to, I think, the best in the cooperative sector push each other to kind of think harder about whatever they're having to decide, right? And all of this, I think, in a way, builds trust. And I think above all, people who are engaged in the sector, both the scholars or otherwise, I think they really have to like humans. It's a funny thing to say, but I think you don't really do well in this sector as a researcher or otherwise if you don't have that kind of, you're not animated by some kind of caring for the human being. And so I think Murray embodies all these traits and then some. And if I'm going to be Murray will never say this, but I'm going to be a little modest in describing Murray. Michael Cook has this concept of cooperative genius, this capacity to solve problems, that otherwise might confound the organization. I think Murray embodies that kind of that genius. And I'll just conclude by saying after an illustrious career. Murray retired in 2022. He, as I've noted, continues to advise the center here. He's a CCSC research fellow. He's a professor emeritus at JSGS. And we're just so very lucky to have him working with us and devoting his time to sharing. And so that's what today's all about. Murray's going to share some reflections on some of his recent thinking on agricultural cooperatives. So Murray's going to talk for about 15-20 minutes, just for process-wise, how things work. Then if the spirit takes me, he and I will have a quick conversation. Otherwise, we'll jump to a breakout discussion, and that discussion will be 12 to 15 minutes. I just want to say a few words about the breakout. We always kind of lose some people, and to my chagrin. But the breakouts are a really great way to kind of connect with other people who are interested in cooperatives, and they've been a really powerful lever for us at the center to build relationships that otherwise wouldn't be there. And so I'm just really grateful for anyone who does stick around. I think most people get a lot out of that, building those networks, just understanding that their interest in the sector is not an isolated fact, but a kind of networked reality, and it's just about kind of registering and actuating those networks as much as possible. So last thing I'll note is if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can message Stan, and Stan's going to wave to folks so you can see him. And you can also you just send him a chat, and he'll help you out. We're going to record this session, and we're going to share the link with anyone who is registered, and we'll be emailing that as soon as the thing's produced. So Murray, I'm going to pass it to you. Looking forward to the talk.
Ooh, wow. What can I say? That's a pretty amazing introduction.
I know you hate that stuff, Murray, but I just couldn't resist. So there you
go. Well, thank you. Really, that's amazing. Welcome everyone. It's really wonderful to see you all. I'm just going to take a moment here and move to the presentation and get it back to the beginning, and just I guess jump right into this. Marc-Andre actually and Stan came up with this question, this title. My original idea for a title was some reflections or a couple of new ideas about co-ops, and in a way I think that's a better description, though it will get into questions of the dissolution, evolution of co-ops, and thinking about the future. But really what I'm going to do today is just give you something. I'm going to give you a little morsel to think about. We don't have a lot of time, and so my job is to throw out something maybe that's a bit different on the co-op side. So how do I what's the way into this? Well, in some ways it actually all stems from a recent trip that I made to New Zealand. I had the luxury and tremendous opportunity to spend 7 weeks at the University of Lincoln. Lincoln's just outside of Christchurch on the South Island. And Lincoln is an agricultural university, and they're actually quite connected to some of the agricultural co-ops in New Zealand. And I'll say a bit more about some of the co-ops in New Zealand in just a moment. What I discovered as I learned a little bit more about the co-ops in New Zealand, that much of the theory that I had been teaching to my students and so forth was actually quite relevant. At least I thought it was, and could be used to examine kind of where the co-ops in New Zealand are at the current time. And so that was kind of interesting for me to say, oh yeah, okay, those ideas that I was giving undergrads and grad students actually apply in real life. Here's some further examples of them. And yet at the same time, as I considered these economic factors, I was also aware that they do not offer a full explanation for the dramatic development of agricultural co-ops. And I want to go back and go away from today and go back to the latter part of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And I go back, my mind goes back there because that's really when many of the co-ops that we see today actually began. And so what was happening then that would help explain the development of agricultural co-ops? And there's been a fair bit written about how ag co-ops and co-ops in general start. But I have always felt that there might be a few things that could be added to the story. Not a replacement of the story, but an addition to the story. So with that in mind, let's move on. So just a little bit about the ag co-ops in New Zealand. First of all, New Zealand has a very, very large cooperative sector just in general, and they have co-ops of an ilk that we actually don't see very much of in Canada at all. They have really kind of a co-op franchise model. So they have a home kind of depot like organization with the individual franchises all owning their franchisee together. The same thing is true with a set of grocery stores. They have taxis that are run by co-ops. There's co-ops in many segments of the New Zealand economy. But it is clear that the big players in the co-op movement in New Zealand are the ag co-ops. And at the top of the list, that's on the top of this list, is Fonterra. It is the large dairy co-op. It handles probably 95% of all the milk in New Zealand. Fonterra is one of the largest dairy organizations, whether it's a co-op or a non-co-op in the world. They are truly a dominant force. Zespri is a major player in the kiwi fruit industry. They actually have the exclusive rights to market all kiwi fruit from New Zealand. There's a couple of co-ops in the meatpacking industry, Alliance Group and Silver Fern, and then some co-ops in the farm input supply sector, fertilizer, plant nutrients, chemicals, and there's also a group, MG Marketing, that's looking at fruit and vegetable marketing. And there's some more, but those are the sort of the biggies. These co-ops, like co-ops elsewhere in the world, are facing some challenges. Fonterra, after moving very, very aggressively into developing consumer brands, moving and developing manufacturing operations literally around the world, are now pulling back and the phrase that they're using is getting back to basics and moving back and into just the sourcing of milk from the New Zealand farmers. And so there's something going on, and I don't understand all the stuff by any stretch of the imagination, but there's clearly something going on around Fonterra. The other area where there's a lot of there are many challenges is in the meatpacking industry, and both Alliance Group and Silver Fern Farms are suffering losses. Alliance Group is closing packing plants. Silver Fern Farms has sold 50% of its business to Shanghai Malling, a Chinese company. And so there's clearly some things happening there. And as I was reading the newspapers and talking to people, it became clear that there was an awareness that if New Zealanders were to, and the New Zealand farmers were to lose their co-ops, they would lose that benchmark or competitive yardstick that, at least some of the people really understood that competitive role that co-ops were providing. And that cooperatives were providing a scale that individual farmers could not achieve. But it was also clear that there were a number of, and I love the New Zealand term for this, freeloader problems as opposed to our free rider problems. Non-members were taking just, believing that the co-op was going to be there and providing that kind of price advantage and without having to join. Individual members were preferring patronage payments to the co-op retaining the earnings, thus depriving the co-op of capital. There was heterogeneity amongst the members that heterogeneity was causing some significant problems. Overall, there was a sense the cooperatives were having to rely much more on debt than they should, and that was making them more vulnerable to downturns. Those were, in some cases, quite substantial. So these are all issues that as I was looking at them saying, oh yes, I can fit this very nicely into my sort of set of theories and ideas that I've been working on over my career. But at the same time, as I've thought about those issues, and as I said at the beginning, while cooperatives offer many advantages, they also face these challenges that I've just described that make success difficult. And in particular, co-ops have a difficult time actually forming. Once they get started, I think it's somewhat easier for a co-op to maintain its operations, but there's a real problem of getting started. And so how do farmers overcome that free rider problem at the beginning? How do they generate that trust to work together? And that got me thinking, back to when these co-ops formed and back to some other ideas. So there, in fact, are some other ideas out there, various answers to the questions that I just posed. One is that some people would say there are many people that are, let me put it the other way. There are only some people, in fact, only a small handful of people are the rational egoists who free ride. Many are what Ostrom calls conditional cooperators, who are willing to cooperate as long as others do. And so if you have a set of farmers that are populated by conditional cooperators, you could imagine cooperatives coming together. There are mechanisms such as escrow accounts that would allow members to make investments only when others also invest. So you can think of putting your money into an escrow account and not releasing that until a sufficiently large number of people have also put their money in, so that you know that you can actually operate at scale. And then social movements help cooperators solve coordination problems and manage organizing costs linked to member diversity. Schneiberg has a very nice paper on this. So there are clearly some ideas out there. I want to throw another one into the mix, and I want to ask a question about the motivation of cooperative members, and ask, is the desire for control a motivator for cooperative formation? And I've kind of come on this idea of control being a motivator, in part because of, and I'll get to this, in part because of my reading of the economic history of that late 1800s, early 1900s, and interesting in part because of, I think, what we're seeing happening today, particularly south of the border, but elsewhere in the world, where there's something going on politically that can't be quite explained by people, voting for a particular party because they think that they're going to be better off, but rather it's because they think that that's a way of their voice being heard or their view being listened to. One can kind of capture that with this idea of a desire for control. So I want to play with this idea, and at the end I want to see what you think, you, the audience, think about this. So if we go back to the late 1800s, This is when the first agricultural co-ops appear in the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I don't have this on my list, but it's also when they were starting to form in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and those countries as well. In the US, this era, called the Gilded Age, saw the creation of trusts, first in railways and oil, and then later in farm machinery and the processing and marketing of agricultural produce. The corporate consolidation along with tariffs. So, we're in this period of McKinley. This is, some people believe that Trump is channeling McKinley with his sort of fixation on tariffs. Tariffs were a big part of the economic policy environment back in the late 1800s. So corporate consolidation, along with tariffs, fueled political conflict, populist revolts, and social movements. And in particular, the Grange in the US. In Saskatchewan, we can think about the Saskatchewan Grain Growers Association. These movements advocated for a host of things, but including antitrust laws, government ownership, market regulation, and economic self-organization, which really took the form of the formation of cooperatives. The traditional economic theory of cooperatives argues that corporate consolidation, that through these trusts and so forth, reduced farmers' profits. Farmers then formed co-ops as a way of earning higher profits. So it was a focus on higher profits, and that was the thing that was driving farmers to join, and not just join, but to actually create co-ops. The question I want to ask is, but what if farmers viewed corporate concentration and tariffs in terms of not just a loss in profits, but maybe first and foremost as a loss of control, of an inability to be able to actually operate their businesses in the way that they wanted to do so? What if they formed co-ops and argued for government ownership and orderly marketing, which they were doing at the same time? What if they did these things as a way of regaining some degree of control over their enterprise and, if you like, the market? Control could be an end in itself, or it could be a means to an end, for example, higher profits, but it would still be, I'm wanting control so that I can do things rather than I want the final thing. So what might be the benefits of a control story? What does that give you if you changed up the motivation for people? Well, for one thing, it's less obvious that there's a free rider problem at that beginning stage, that is when co-ops are being formed. If a farmer is looking for control, then they have to have ownership. They waiting to let someone else invest and then to run the co-op and then sort of get the benefits from the co-op existing does not provide control. It does not really provide that kind of agency that I think I'm trying to get at. The control story also provides a common motivation for co-op formation and the policy demands they were making. So the policy demands of orderly marketing, government ownership of elevator companies, railways, and so forth, doesn't fit. It fits a little bit with, we just want more money. It fits, I think, much better if you have this idea that what they're looking for is some way of controlling the vagaries of the marketplace. If we went to a control story, it also has some interesting dynamics because if you have a control goal, then the implications change once a co-op is formed. So before the co-op is formed, I think it reduces the free rider problem. But once the co-op is formed, attention is then shifted to control of the co-op rather than control of the market. And for instance, then a desire for control might then shed light on why governance is so often highly contested, since my definition of governance is who gets to decide what. So if that's what governance is, then it really is about who has control. If we take this idea just a little bit further, some of the free rider problems that we observe might actually be an unwillingness to participate in an organization due to a lack of control. So now we're thinking about people needing to have this kind of reciprocity, if you like. I will participate. I will take. I will become involved. I will provide capital, but only if I have control. I think this also gives us a new way of looking at heterogeneity issues, and so it isn't really just the heterogeneity that's the critical thing. It's that heterogeneity then implies different control, and it's really about who has control. And finally, I want to take this idea of control back to the kind of zeitgeist, if you like, in that latter part of the 1800s, and particularly the 1890s. I've been reading a biography of Rockefeller by Chernow, and Rockefeller appears to have been motivated by more by a desire to stop the boom and bust in the early oil industry than he was by the money that could be earned. Now, he didn't turn he didn't turn his nose down at the money, but his writings suggest that he was really concerned with actually trying to bring some order to the market, and that appears to it's in part that's informing this idea of what if we had a desire for control. And I'll just end on this by saying that I think that what people have called the neo-mercantilism of the late 1800s rejected the idea generally of competition and instead supported tariffs and the corporate concentration that is exemplified by the robber barons. So they weren't looking at the money, solely at the money. They were looking at creating an industry, creating an economy that was in some ways control and controllable. So with that, I've kind of thrown out an idea, and it's up to you now. I want to get your ideas of what you think. Is the desire for control a motivating factor for people? Does that make sense as something that would actually cause people to behave, to do something like form a co-op? Does the addition of a control motivation shed light on cooperative behavior that might otherwise be difficult to understand? About 10 years ago, Peter Couchman and I argued in a little pamphlet that we wrote that the collapse of large cooperatives starts with management seeing cooperation as the problem. Does the idea of a control motivation help explain this observation, or doesn't it? And then finally, what might be the implications of a control motivation if we felt that it had some legs, if you like, if I can put it that way? What implications does a control motivation have for the way that we might manage co-ops? I understand that Stan's going to give you these questions later on. I don't want you to answer all of them. I want you to pick one of them, or if there's another question that you have that comes out of what I've said, feel free to pick up on that. But with that, let me stop, and over to you, Marc-Andre.
Right. Well, thank you, Marie. That was a lot of fun. I'm going to do something. I'm going to imagine I'm on a walk with Murray, and because Murray and I will often have these walks, and we'll talk about these kind of things. And Murray, I want to throw something at you, and then we'll put it in. We'll put your questions to the breakout groups. But I can almost imagine and I'm doing this on the fly, so bear with me if this doesn't play out. That's why I'm emphasizing this context of a walk. But I often think of one of the kind of primary human motivations is around managing anxiety linked to uncertainty, and one of the ways you do that is kind of through some sense of control, right? And so that's kind of my micro theory, if I want to put it that way, right?
Right.
in a macro sense, like historically, how did we solve that problem? We solved that collectively, whether it was kind of tribal societies or, usually some small hunter-gatherer societies or feudal societies. And what happens when you move into capitalism is you start pulling apart all those structures that preserve people's some sense of control and some sense that
Yes.
there was a normative, there's some stability and predictability to the future. And so what you've described, like in the 19th century, was an upending of all these structures, increasingly upending, and then with power being concentrated, being applied in a very seemingly from the recipients of that power, an indiscriminate way, not predictable way.
Yes.
So you layer that on top of an agricultural, if you're thinking the agriculture, there's already a lot of uncertainty about climate and weather and whatever, like there's a million things that can go wrong. And then you add in the social predation potential from large, and then this impulse for control becomes really powerful in that context. But then as the state kind of grows and starts absorbing some of that stability role, right? Like it starts creating some of that stability through social programs and others. Then you've kind of taken away some of the conditions for co-ops because so much of that, at least part of that control problem is being solved somewhere else now. And
Yes.
so then the free
Yes.
riding problem becomes more acute potentially. Anyway, I'm just thinking about this on the fly, and it just occurred to me that that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it, perhaps. And I also think of Hyman Minsky's famous book, Stabilizing an Unstable Economy. It's all about that. It's about how the
Right.
state needs to stabilize for production, because firms will not invest in long dated assets like airplanes or railroads or trains or car production unless they have some certainty about the future. And so the state plays this fundamental role. And all the co-ops did was kind of create a bit of a balance of power in some of that conversation. And then the state comes in. And anyway, so I'm just curious if you're kind of what your reaction to those ideas are, and then we'll go to breakout and then
Yeah. That's uh, that's a very nice addition to what I was saying. I would agree with you completely. I actually thought about putting something in the presentation, but I knew it was going to be too long about the connection to capitalism. I'll pick up on that aspect of what you said. The the idea of that capitalist idea, really, gets formulated by Adam Smith. There's a very nice piece that I kind of rely on. It's a review of J.R. Commons, some of J.R. Commons' work. Commons defined, and he was talking about moving from feudalism to capitalism, but it's production in a feudal period, there was production for use. You produce something for its immediate use. In capitalism, it's production for exchange. It is all about producing something, not because it will give you what you need. You're producing it for the value that it could have in exchange, and then you buy and sell and so forth. And what you have with this emergence of capitalism is the potential for, because I think you have the potential for instability along the lines of the way that you've just described it, Marc-Andre, that um, this production now for exchange means that it's everything is being disconnected from what you are. So the stuff that you're producing is disconnected from your life because it's going off someplace else. So you have workers working in factories, and the stuff that they're producing, they never see it. It goes off to consumers, all over the country, around the world. Same thing for agricultural producers and so forth. You're losing this connection with kind of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis that you used to have. And I think, what's interesting is to see the industrialists of that late 1800s kind of reacting in that same way, saying, actually, we can't live with in an economy that is so fluid. It won't work. You talked about the incentives for investment, but we can't take even the psychological ups and downs that occur. We have to have some control. And the genius of Rockefeller was that he saw a way to be able to provide that. That was his kind of genius. It had, some negative impacts on lots of different groups, but I think we can understand his motivation. And I think if what I'm getting at is that co-ops or farmers were finding themselves in exactly that same environment, overlaid by the fact that the industrialists have actually even taken further control away from them, that the market was even more this thing that was throwing them up and down and hither and yon. I think you're right. I think that this need for security is a really basic human desire that we have.
Boy, there's so much to go with here, Marie. Like I am going to throw it, but I'll just throw these two thoughts. One is, of course, the contemporary situation. You flagged this around tariffs and what's going on with that. There's something deeper that seems to be happening there. But also, just if we were to kind of have a longer chat about economics and firm pricing. I actually think firm pricing, there's implications for this control perspective on firm pricing and the variability of firm pricing, or the stability rather of firm pricing,
Yes.
and how stabilize relationships within the sector, within sectors. Anyway, it's a whole long conversation. We're going to do breakouts. Stan, can you break out groups of four or five, and we'll give folks 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. If anyone wants to share any reflections with Murray about your chats, I see Jeremy's hand is up. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Thanks, Marc-Andre. And I had to say in my group as well, I was glad that when you stepped up and mentioned stability, that was what I was going to say. And that's what we discussed in the group as well. I think it's less about control and more about stability. People want control, but not because they want control, but because they want stability for themselves and their community. And so that's what we kind of were discussing, is the different nuances behind what co-ops can contribute and bring. And that my psychology background probably is contributing to why I thought control is maybe a heavier authoritarian word versus stability, and the need for stability. People want stability for their personal lives. They want it for their communities. Co-ops were, I think designed and thrived in small towns because it does provide a lot of stability for them. And maybe that's why we're seeing people not wanting to join, because they've got the cooperative already existing. So they can piggyback off of it because it has granted them the stability without having to invest, personal resources. So that's where my kind of thought process went, was deeper than just control over something. But what is the control offering? It's offering stability. And you articulated that really well before the breakout session. So I think that's where I'll leave it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Murray. Do you have a reaction? And then I see Dion's hand up. And you're muted, Murray, just soon.
Yeah, Jeremy, good point. I agree with you. I think this need for stability is really important. As Marc-Andre knows, as Dion knows, and she's up next. I've been, and this has been thanks to Marc-Andre. I've been poking my way through some cybernetics and systems theory stuff, and stability there. That's the critical idea coming out of cybernetics. It is about stability of a system, keeping variables at a particular level. But at the same time, they emphasize the need for control to be able to achieve stability. And so it's hard to take away, and it's hard to separate those concepts out. Because control is the means to a particular end. I'll just leave it at that, because I think otherwise it just becomes, we're just, going around with words. But I think there's, I just want to point out that if you think about stability, then you're going to need to think about control mechanisms, that is just the nature of systems and the way that you have to be able to stabilize them.
Yeah, no, that's great, Maria. Just a little addendum is the cybernetics literature came out of control theory, or these efforts to control systems, right? It's like engineering control theory, and then applied to social spheres. Okay, Dion, go ahead.
Murray, this is so great. I can't wait to have a walk and talk. I just want to talk about a comment in our group, and then I have a question. So Eric asked this great question about, like, as the co-ops get bigger, right? Like, hit the co-op his parents belong to, or that he belongs to. It's like, this idea about the loss of control as like leading to less engagement with the co-op, I think explains a lot of it. So he asked, like, as co-ops get bigger, is it like that any of them kind of should break up, and is there any that do? And of course that asks the question about scale, and we started talking about how co-ops, like the Desjardins does that when their co-ops get too big, right? They break them apart. In the CRS, you have like the local co-ops kind of coming together to achieve the scale by cooperating together, but then the control problem sort of lends itself to a different level, right? There's now concerns that the local co-ops or the cases don't have the control they once did, because now some of it is placed in the central. So I actually thought this idea of control was super helpful, Marie, to think about these problems in different levels of cooperation as well. So loved that. That was where our conversation went. My question actually, and I love that you talked about John Commons, by the way, who is like a forefather of industrial relations, so the labor sort of perspective as well. And sort of I was thinking about like the start of the union movement and how this concept could also fit there. So I guess my question though is, like, what's the difference between control and power? Is control like more of a concept when like people feel like they actually don't have power, and that's where like co-ops or these like sort of on the margin, the periphery kinds of organizations form, and that like, but actually the sort of that comes out of a reaction to power, right? Or is it that people actually all have a fundamental need for power, and so we're all trying to like, so I guess that's, I know it's like kind of a nuanced question, but like, is there something about like, is there a difference between control and power in the broader sense about that some of these people are forming it in reaction to other power structures that they see that they don't have any say or impact over?
Great question. It's one that I've been thinking about. There's clearly an aspect of power, or at least lack of a sense that you lack power, you lack influence. I think is behind that, what I'm calling control. At the same time, I don't know that it is. So yes to there being a connection to power. At the same time, it's not as if people are looking to be able to, have the kind of power. I'll just pick up on this that Donald Trump has been claiming for himself. Pope. Being able to influence the Canadian election. ... I don't think it's that kind of power that people are looking for, but it is a sense of being able to control at least some things within your sphere of that are affecting you. With I think a realization that that it's a that it's circumscribed, and I just saw your note, self-determination. That might be a nice way of putting it. Before I go to the next one, I just want to give a shout out to Mike O'Connor, who's on the call. Hi, Mike.
I'm
Mike's
How's it going?
Mike's one of the people I met in New Zealand, and we had some marvelous conversations about some of the co-ops in that part of the world. So
thanks, Maria. I had the good fortune of being broken out with Mike, and didn't recognize him at first because he was wearing a plaid jacket. I'm like, hey, that's not Mike. Anyway, you see, I have a million things I want to say, but I won't, because I can have a walk with Marie and Dion. Yawen, go ahead, jump in. You have a question, I believe, and then we'll wrap things up.
Thank you, Marc-Andre. So my hand raised, but actually I saw Diane's chat, self-determination. Maybe that's exactly my question. So it's more, I wanted to ask Marie, what is your definition of control and power? We talked about it, but also perhaps a sense of agency or self-determination. Because for me now, like I think about back in school, we talked a lot about how people overcome free riders' problem to form cooperatives, right, in history or at the moment. Now, if I think about this question again, nothing come out of academic research or literature, but more from my own experience or things like that. I do feel that what motivates people, especially a group of people, come together to overcome any kind of free rider or to problem to form something like a co-op or be an entrepreneur, you do really need to have a sense of belief and wanted to have control of your own destiny, that kind of self-determination, and that's kind of control in that sense. So from that perspective, I would definitely feel that makes more sense to explain the forming of lots of co-ops or over the explanation of like prices or some more monetary kind of explanation. That makes lots more sense to me, definitely. Yeah, but then of course depends on the definition of control, how you define it. Yeah, thank you for the talk. That's very interesting.
Just I have a quick comment. I know we need to. Marc-Andre wants to leave. Just a Yawen, it's nice to see you. For the group, Yawen was a student at University of Saskatchewan at the policy school and with the center. So it's always great to see students coming back. You know, as you were talking, what it made me think of, I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but let me just run with this for a second. Makes me actually think about this distinction I was making between feudalism and capitalism. In the feudal system, people had very well-defined roles. It was very clear who you were, what you were to do, what was expected of you. In a capitalist, as you then moved into a capitalist world, all those expectations, constraints, and so forth started to disappear. And you are presented with a situation where I think people are, you know, and this is the rise of individualism. You know, this is at the same time we've got, you know, the philosophers John Locke and others saying it is about, you know, you have the individual as the center. I think, therefore I am. So René Descartes. These ideas are completely different than this feudalist system where you have a set role. And I think once you move into this let's call it a liberal world, where you are supposed to have agency as an individual, I think what comes along with that is a sense of the need for, call it what you want, self-determination, agency, but the ability to be able to have some influence on the things around you. I think that is part of the philosophical baggage that comes with this move from away from feudalism into a capitalist society. And in a way, I guess that's what I'm throwing out for you to think about is, what if we actually start to build that component into our thinking more than we have? Does it get us to some places that are important, that shed light on some, as I said in my questions, on some activities or events that otherwise are difficult to explain, but they make more sense once we have this new perspective on them.
Well, thank you, Marie. That's a wonderful way to close. I will note the anti-Ganesh movement. They famously would say, "You can do it." It was this kind of empowering message of what were largely a kind of feudal world that had to move into a capitalist world and became a real hotbed of cooperativism in Atlantic Canada. So there's a really nice tie in there. Okay, folks,
Very
I'm
nice.
gonna wrap it up. I just want to note that we have one more webinar. It's kind of a joint webinar. It's not part of our co-op conversation, but it's being done in partnership with the Communities and Sustainability Signature area here at the University of Saskatchewan. And it's called Food Security and Cooperatives, Lesson from East Africa. So it's actually quite on point. This is going to take place Thursday, May 15th from 10 to 11:30, really leaning into the ag co-op space. And it might surprise you to know that ag co-ops and the co-op sector in general have a huge outsized role in all of East Africa, whether it's Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda. They have universities devoted to co-ops. They have large farm co-ops, and they are playing a really important role in food security. So we're going to hear from people who've studied that and are from there. We're going to have someone from the University of Tanzania and someone from the University of Saskatchewan talking about their work around these questions, and it all ties to other issues like food security and control and food systems and so on. So it's going to be a great conversation. Hope you can join. I think Natalie is putting the information in chat. I want to thank Murray so much for this wonderful and engaging and stimulating conversation. It's a great way to end our co-op conversation series. Thank you all for attending. A special shout out to Mike O'Connor, all the way from New Zealand in the plaid jacket. Thanks, Mike. And we have to touch base soon again, too. So take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. That was fabulous. A lot of fun.